This is 5 Live Sport,
the 5 Live Cricket Show.
Hello and welcome to 5 Live Cricket with me, Eleanor Oldroyd. We're live from Sydney to talk all about the men's Ashes with the first test in Brisbane just 9 days away. Australian legend Glenn Mcgrath will be with us shortly to take us inside the Aussie camp. But I'm joined now on a balcony in Sydney with a few planes going overhead, with tea, coffee promised anyway, to just kind of start running through some of the details around the tour. Steve Finn is with us, multiple Ashes winner. How many? 3 times Ashes winner.
3 times, yeah.
3 times Ashes winner. Yeah, that's not too bad. And Jonathan Agnew, our cricket correspondent, is here on your how many tours is this?
This is number 9, believe it or not. Not all for the BBC. Eight for the BBC, but 9 in total. So it's fascinating. I mean, looking up at the top cloud, look at it. I mean, people are saying, "Cool, lucky old them. I've got a stinking cold." It's rained non-stop here for 10 days, and what it's like up there in Brisbane. I've just looked at the weather forecast again, and these airport forecasts only really go for 2 days. It's just saying rain, and this is the last chance that England and indeed Australia have for practice. So there's lots of things to talk about.
Yeah, I've almost felt like I have to apologise to people back home, the fact that we're in Australia, Finny. And when you say, yeah, I know, but the weather's not that great. I mean, it's still amazing to be here, you know, we still feel so fortunate to be here covering it for the BBC and bringing the atmosphere to people back at home as well, because this is a special time in the life of any cricketer and the life of any cricket fan, and we're so conscious as well that, you know, most people can't be here. The Barmy Army can't be here. You know, or certainly the locals will be here, but people can't travel in because of the restrictions. How's it been like for you these last few days?
Yeah, it's been, I mean, the message I received this morning from my girlfriend with ice all over the car, I was like, even if it does rain for a couple of hours today, I can still get over that. But no, it's nice to be here in amongst it. I mean, this is my first time in Australia, not on a cricket tour as part of an England team, so I've had a slightly different experience to the ones that I've had before, albeit more friendly than when you're here touring with the actual England team and walking around in your England tracksuit. So yeah, it's been nice. It's been pretty chilled out so far, but you can feel it just starting to ramp up, and with all the off-field stuff that's been going on as well, it's going to make for an interesting couple of weeks until that first test.
Yeah, also delighted to say that we're joined from back home in the UK by Carlos Brathwaite, T20 World Cup star and TMS star, I think now as well. Carlos, evening to you. I kind of was going to say evening to you because it's morning here, of course. Is this one of the things that you would have loved as a cricketer in a different world, in a different, you know, if you've been born in a different country, would you have loved to have played in an Ashes tour?
Yeah, for sure. All the hype around it. The romance of the story and way it's actually called the Ashes, everything around it makes it such a spectacle. Happy to be born in Barbados. I don't wish this weather that I'm experiencing in Portsmouth on anyone. But yeah, looking from the outside in, especially in the Caribbean, this would be 6 p.m. kickoff. So it's perfect time to have some dinner, sit down and watch some television, and Ashes cricket is front and centre, so it's a brilliant spectacle to watch when in the Caribbean.
Planes going over, where's that heading to? I think it's the early morning flights, isn't it, coming into Sydney probably at this stage?
At least they're flying.
Well, and that's an but you know, that's actually a pertinent thing, because up until, a month ago? There were no flights coming in, no international flights coming in and out of Australia. And so the context that this Ashes series is going ahead in is really, really not ideal. But at least it's happening. Look, we're going to get into matters on the field because that's what we're all excited about. And let's face it, there's plenty to talk about. But lots of issues to discuss off the field as well as we build up to the first test, which is just over a week's time now. Build up for both teams affected by the bad weather that we've mentioned. Yeah, but, you know, Carlos, with due respect to you in freezing in Portsmouth, players quarantining after the T20 World Cup as well. Concerns about the new COVID variant, which has hit us in the last couple of days too. England only able to play 29 overs in their first warm-up match against the Lions last week. And the forecast doesn't look great for their next match against them today, later on today, our time. So Australia also have suffered. Their match against Australia A tomorrow could also be affected. The lack of game time, the impact that has on the teams, Steve, what are you hearing from the camp? How hard has it been?
Well, I think from experience, as a bowler, I think it's that first day in the field. I think you hear a lot of guys talk about that first full 90 overs that you spend in the field and bowl 20 overs. That's when it really catches up with your body. You can do all the amount of fitness training, all the amount of netting, but actually being on your feet for those 6.5 hours through the day, bowling your overs at high intensity, then coming off and mentally and physically being exhausted and having to pull up and do it again. I mean, after my first day, I'm an old man now, 32, relatively. And
yeah, relatively, Philly.
After my first day in the field, any season, you can't move the next day. You're walking around like you're stiff as a board. And if the preparation keeps going the way that it is, those guys are going to be experiencing that on the first day of a test match. That's the whole reason why we come here and you have the warm-up games, like, yes, getting into rhythm, getting into form. But when you're in international sport, you do sort of slip back into those habits from a performance perspective, but the physical perspective with the potential heat pulling up the next day, it's going to make it mighty difficult.
I mean, there's never been an Ashes series like this, and it's the same for both sides. Let's make that absolutely clear. But if you consider that only this morning will all those cricketers involved in the World T20 actually be released from quarantine, Australian and English, so they've been on the Gold Coast. They've been confined to their rooms since then, allowed out for 2 hours a day to train, and they're going to play a test match next week. The squad hasn't even got together yet. And those who have been here since, well, getting on for, 3-4 weeks, they've had half a day outside in which some batsmen batted and the bowlers did nothing. So they've had indoor nets. You can tell just by talking to one or two of them that heads are in danger of dropping a bit because they're here to work. They're here to play cricket. And just to open your curtains every morning and see it pouring with rain is very demoralising. You've got the Ashes next week. I mean, just to put it into context, normally now, probably today actually, England will be starting a game against Australia A, possibly in Hobart, which was always seen as the big build-up, the big preparation for the test. They've already played a couple of first-class games elsewhere, probably in Perth and Adelaide. Now in Hobart, everyone's fighting for places. The Aussie press is there. Everything's ramping up. People are talking about Brisbane. But you've got to be honest. I mean, no one's up there. The only people who can be in Queens are the people who live there. That's why we're here in Sydney. We've got a chance, if we do the first test from here, we can do the rest of the tour by following it round. That's why we're doing things from here. There's no television coming from Brisbane. There's nothing coming from Brisbane. No one's seeing the players. We don't know who's fit. And the players don't know who's fit. How fit is Ben Stokes? How fit is Stokes to bowl? All of these questions, we have no idea, and worse still, they don't know.
Yeah, I mean, Ben Stokes had a particularly torrid time of it. We'll talk about that in a second as well. I mean, Carlos, you were due to come out to the Big Bash, weren't you? But you got injured. So what kind of conversations were you having about, because people think, well, you get into Australia, it's an amazing time, the weather's amazing, you get plenty of time for rest and relaxation as well, being on the beach. I mean, what sort of conversations were you having about all of this?
But I didn't have much cricket since CPL, so for me I would have been buzzing to get out into Australia and just count down the days. But I did do the 14 days last year, and I tell you what, I was craving those 2 hours a day that the England boys are getting. You can go nuts in your room, I'm telling you. And actually one of the overseas players that came over to play Big Bash last year only lasted 6 days. And it's a real feeling of being in jail. I've never been in prison, but the whole vibe of you push your luggage in and then someone takes your key and you don't get that key back at all. The door is slammed shut. You get 3 knocks on the door, breakfast, lunch, dinner. Funny enough, sometimes I would eat breakfast and then go to bed, and it's real. I don't know, it disturbing, to be honest. And I know a lot of people go through a lot worse. So I'm not trying to feel like a victim or anything, but being in that situation and knowing that one part of you is trying to get through a 14-day quarantine and the other part of you is trying to look forward to a high-level tournament, it's going to be very, very difficult. So I hope that the boys would have used those 2 hours a day, not only to physically get in shape, but mentally to just tune out from the four walls that they would have been seeing day in, day out.
I think one of the points that's worth making here as well is that this could have been avoided potentially, because quarantine rules in different states is really different. So as Aga said, we're in Sydney at the moment, where we came in, we had to do PCR tests just to check when on arrival, and then we've been free to go around and have a normal life. Same thing in Victoria, where Melbourne is. Different again in Adelaide, so that's South Australia, have different quarantine rules. So if we go in there, we'll have to test and then not leave, and then and it's changed again because of the variant. But Western Australia, so the Perth test might not happen at all, or it might have to be completely moved. In Queensland, should they have changed the venue of the first test, Aggers, from Queensland, from Brisbane to somewhere else?
Well, they wouldn't sort of know what the weather's going to be like, so
No,
you
we
give
can't
them
blame
that.
them for that.
you give them that as an excuse, obviously. It's traditional, It's Ashes series do begin at Brisbane. You can see why they wanted to do it, just as there's always an Ashes test in Perth, and they seem to be clinging to the hope that that'll happen, although that does seem very unlikely. But there doesn't seem to have been... Well, while there seems to be flexibility on the one hand, while Perth is still dangling there, and it's the last test match this time, they haven't made a decision about that. They did seem to go very early with the decision on Queensland. And that was, let's not forget, back in the really robust quarantine times, and the England players are digging their heels in. They really were quite entrenched, actually, about what they were going to face when they came here, and there was the question about the families and so on, and that's just starting to rumble a bit, by the way, as well, in the background, with the possible changes to quarantining and so on. So there is some disturbance there, if you like. But no, I mean, the common sense thing, if they're flexible with Perth, why can't they be flexible with the rest? They've got all these stadia, they're in great nick. Just be flexible and move things around. The fact is that the first test could be being played here in Sydney next week, and all would be well, and you'd have big crowds.
Or in Canberra, or in Hobart.
You'd think that the Australian players would be petitioning for the same thing, because it would be different had only the England players needed to quarantine and the Australian players not. That would have felt incredibly unfair. But you'd imagine there's some big voices in that Australia dressing room who've spent a long time away from home and sat in hotel rooms looking at the walls for the last few months, with the World Cup, as I understand, was a pretty hard quarantine inside your hotel and not leaving, to come straight from that to a 14-day quarantine to a week's preparation to go into a test match. I think it's a very tricky thing. And I think another point that's worth mentioning is also the fact that these guys are proud about their performances, and they're not going to want or be happy really to be going into an Ashes test match with this little amount of preparation, because you're judged on this stuff. Like, when people look back on your career, the numbers that you produce are how you're judged as a test match cricketer.
Well,
and
Steve Harmison, one of England's great fast bowlers, it's that first ball.
Yeah, he'll never lose that, unfortunately.
The first test match.
But yes, we don't know what the teams are going to be, but it's roughly half of the players of each team will have had that quarantine, including, of course, Australia's captain. It's a bizarre situation to go into, and how certainly England, how they pick their team, because Stokes is so pivotal. And he simply hasn't bowled enough, really, I don't think, to judge whether he can get through a test match as one of four seam bowlers. That, as we know, balances the whole team. We had all this last summer, of course. So there are so many unknowns about this. It could be a remarkable test match. It could be a thrilling game of batsmen missing straight balls and everything else. But who knows? But we certainly don't. But I don't think they do either.
No, and I think the point to make as well is that everybody is so aware of the pandemic and the uncertainties that it's caused for all of our lives for such a long time, and cricket is just a part of that. But we don't know what's going to happen in Perth. There's talk that it could be a day-night test in Melbourne or Sydney at the end of the series, rather than...
Well, just quietly, here's a thought.
Oh, go on.
Here's a thought. Okay, so given that Australia are pretty firm favourites to win the series,
Yes.
You start from that point. However, both teams go into the Gabba, as we've talked about, very undercooked and unknown. Adelaide, day-nighter. Mm-hmm. England like those sort of conditions, as we know, Jimmy Anderson and co. Melbourne, well, you get your Mark Woods out, and that's a pretty flat pitch. And so Sydney, we go back to Melbourne for another day-nighter. Suddenly, I don't think England will be complaining not going to Perth at all. They haven't won there for years. These alterations actually could in the end suit England.
Well, we talk about the preparations for the Ashes being overshadowed, and so many elements to this. Also, particularly by the Yorkshire racism scandal, the powerful testimony from Azim Rafiq about the racism that he directly experienced at the club. Azim Rafiq has alleged that Joe Root, the England captain, was present on nights out when a racist term about his Pakistani heritage was used towards him, and Rafiq also said he was hurt when Root said he hadn't witnessed instances of racism when the pair were teammates at Yorkshire. Well, Root has been speaking to Jonathan and says he hopes to meet up with Rafiq when the Ashes is over.
We've exchanged a couple of messages since, quite recently actually, and hopefully when we finish this tour we'll get the opportunity to sit down and talk about this whole situation, about how we can move the game forward. You know, as I mentioned in my statement as well, along with talking to Azim, I wanted to speak to Lord Patel at the club, and you know, those dialogues have started as well. So I think it's important that we keep finding ways of bettering the sport, finding ways how we can individually affect things for the better and make a real change in this.
Do you recall the evenings that he talked about in his testimony, in which you were present, he claimed, in which there was offensive language used?
No, I stand by what I said. I don't recall those incidences, and if they are oversights on my part, then you know that's an area which we all have to learn from, and I have to learn from. And you know, I think about things that have happened since then. There's been other things that have happened on the cricket field where I feel like I have stepped in and you know, called things out, and I think that comes from growth and learning and understanding and education. And there's still further education that you know I need to undergo and develop myself further, and certainly within our game as well. I think everyone does. So I think there's so much work that has to be done. There's so much energy that has to be thrown into this, and there has to be a real want of drive to make a real difference. And you know, I look at the group of players that are around this team right now, and the other two England men's teams. We've spent a lot of time talking about these topics and what's happened and how we can make a real difference. And you know, certainly feel like there's a lot of good conversations happening, which hopefully can now follow into action, and that we can really start to drive the game from our position at the spear point of the sport. Again, that will only come in time through proving it and actually delivering on some of the things that we've discussed as a group and individually as well.
The first test starts in 8 days' time. I just wonder if you've ever been in this sort of situation before, sort of lack of preparation. And I mean, for both teams, frankly, I mean, all the hype, all the build-up, all the usual preparation there is for the first test at the Gabba, and you've barely been able to get outside. I mean, just you know, where are you? And also Australia at the moment.
Yeah, I think it's been unusual. You know, obviously having to spend a period of time in quarantine and training within that quarantine phase, and then obviously coming to Brisbane and the weather being as it has been, we haven't had that 3-day game as we would have liked. But ultimately, it was always going to be the case off the back of this World Cup that tomorrow was be the first day as a squad that we would get together as an Ashes squad with those World Cup guys joining us. So we always knew that you know this next phase, this next period of time was going to be the most crucial part in terms of doing everything we can collectively together, getting tight, getting clear, and you know using this as best as we can to ready ourselves. And I think that's going to be the real test for us. We've done a lot of brilliant planning in the last couple of years, and coming into this about mentally how we can be ready, how we can, you know, what's going to work on different surfaces and different grounds, and having a real good idea of how we're going to break down their team. But I suppose, as you mentioned, it's been unusual. It's been different to a lot of previous tours, whether that be here or elsewhere. But the guys have really taken the opportunities to get as much as they can from what they've had. And that's all you really can do in these situations, along with, you know, mentally making sure you're as ready as you can be. And it might be that in the next couple of days we get some similar weather and we don't get the time out there in the middle. And it's going to be just really important that whether it be you play those games in your mind a little bit more and you visualize a little bit more, find different ways of making sure by that first ball comes down at the Gabba, we're in the best place possible to come out on top.
Yeah, and you're right. I've seen the forecast for Brisbane again tomorrow. I'm thinking of sort of a key selection like Stokes the bowler rather than Stokes the batsman. I mean, things like that. How that balance the team, How are you going to be able to judge that?
Well, again, we have to just judge it as best as we can with the information that's available to us. It's been great to have Ben back around the group and to see him back in training and to be going through his work again. We'll have to gauge that closer to the time. But obviously we would benefit from having this game. If we don't, we'll have to be smart and work around it. As I said, prepare as best we can, both individually and as a squad as well.
Well, that was Joe Root talking to Jonathan Agnew last night, our time.
Which normally I'd have done
probably. Well,
I'd normally have been probably 3 times by now on a normal tour. That was the first time that we've had to talk to Joe. And it was very restricted on Zoom. I was allowed 2 questions on the racism issue and 3 questions on the cricket. So that's how it's being done at the moment. As I say, there's never been a tour quite like this.
No, absolutely. Carlos, what do you make of what Joe Root is saying about the Azeem Rafiq affair? Of course, is going to be something that the players will have had, because this is all happening when they were a long way from home. They apparently stayed up late to watch the DCMS testimony. What have you made of Joe Root's response to this?
I thought it was quite mature. As he said, he can't remember an instance, and he seemed to have been far removed from the exact incident that Azeem Rafiq had recalled. So for Azeem Rafiq, the person experiencing it, obviously he will have a mental picture. He will have a mental recording of exactly what was said, who was there, who intervened, who did not, because he's suffering it, he's the victim. But for persons on the outskirts that probably don't even see it as racism and taking it as banter the same way the perpetrator is, that probably slipped their mind, like in the long list of things that would have happened over the last 10, 12, 13 years, however. And I remember having a chat with an ex-England player, and they were just like, they hope that in their past, being on the field, in dressing rooms, sharing jokes, etc., that they have not abused someone or discriminated against anyone. So I think there is a lot of learning to be done, and I think that's why when players or persons kneel and you hear booing or you see people trying to derail the meaning of the movement, the meaning of the gesture, I think that's where it becomes a bit infuriating, because I don't think anyone is saying that a white person knows exactly what a black person or an Asian person goes through, but we're saying, look, it has been happening, it has afforded or has costed us opportunities to grow as people in our professions, and in some cases, as Azeem Rafiq mentioned, emotional trauma as well. So for persons to keep saying, oh yeah, there's no problem, and turning a blind eye when you clearly have so many instances, so much people saying, look, this is what happens, then I think that's where it's a bit infuriating. And I was hoping last summer that when Black Lives Matter came up, West Indies came over and took the knee, that was the beginning of, introspection into the county game, the international game, how black players are treated, black coaches, black football managers, etc. And then West Indies left England, and then England didn't take the knee anymore. So for me, that was like, was England taking the knee because West Indies were here? And then the next time England took the knee was when the West Indies women came. So for me, it's like you're sending a mixed message. You're either with the movement and you're doing it right throughout, regardless if the other team does it, or you're not with the movement, and even if West Indies are here, you're not doing it. So somewhere along the line, some persons are feeding the political side of things. West Indies are here, we doing it, we supporting it, whatever. If West Indies are not here, well, do y'all want to do it or not? Nah, I think it needs to be something consistent.
Yeah. I wonder what will happen before games in the Ashes, Steve. Do you think that there'll be a gesture, a gesture, more than a gesture, taking the knee? Will that happen, do you think? There's been no statement or anything yet, has there? But I'd be surprised if there wasn't something, and not as I don't think, you don't want it to be a reactive gesture. You actually want, as Carlos has really articulately said there, you want
change, and you need to move forward from this point now where we're at, which is low as a cricketing community. And you don't want empty gestures. You want action and things to actually happen that make tangible differences. And I think that's the most important thing. So if there's a gesture, then I think great. I think it's important to acknowledge and realise that we have to get better and have to move forward. And I think that they've tried to do that, even if it has been clumsy up to this point. But it's the real change that is going to make the difference. And as Carlos so eloquently said there, I agree with everything that he said.
Right, let's talk about some matters surrounding the players, some matters on the field eventually, although, as Aggers has said, 29 overs have been bowled so far in the build-up to this Ashes series in total across both teams, so it's not exactly ideal with 9 days to go. But we are, excited, nervous. The anticipation of Ben Stokes' potential return is great, and it will be, and I'm sure that as we approach those first balls being bowled at the Gabba, if he plays, we'll talk about that in a second. But he's had a bit of a dramatic time of it, as we've said. He revealed in his Mirror column yesterday, or today at home, yesterday in Australia, that he almost choked on a tablet. So he was in his hotel room on his own. He took the tablet, I assume it was a painkiller of some sort, and it had gone down the wrong way, got stuck in his windpipe. He said until it actually came out, I thought this might be the end. I was on my own in my room, couldn't breathe as it became lodged and started to dissolve. It felt like my mouth was on fire. Without going into too much detail, I have never seen as much saliva as I did on Sunday morning. It was a genuinely frightening experience. He got hit in the nets as well.
Yeah, nasty one. It was the dog throwing, dog ball.
Ball chucking thing, yeah.
And because the nets, again, haven't been fit, apparently Root was saying in the course of that interview that a number of players have been hit, actually, because balls are simply coming off length and so on. They're trying to get out there and play, but he got a really nasty blow on the arm. I think Jonathan Trott, not the sort of 75-mile-an-hour bowler Jonathan Trott, but with the dog stick. Dog stick is obviously rather more lethal than that, but he just flew up, bang, straight on the forearm, and apparently it's a very nasty blow. So I presume that's why he's taking the tablet. He's
more like 95 miles an hour, Aggers.
Is he?
What, trotting with a ball chucking stick?
Yeah.
Oh, well, there you go. You wouldn't have on the forearm, would you?
Knowing him from Warwickshire and Birmingham as you do, Carlos. Carlos, would you be playing Ben Stokes in the first test, bearing in mind that he's not played any cricket at all since... When was it? When was that?
June,
that
July.
Pakistan T20 series that he was called up for? Yeah, and he obviously he's had his broken finger, which he's recovering from. He took his break to prioritise his mental health. Would you play him at the Gabba?
Let's put it this way: if I were in charge and I needed a 12th man to wheel Ben Stokes on with a wheelchair, he'd have to be in the first 11. England, I think, with all due respect to the players out there, don't have the quality in depth to find an 11 that can't afford Ben Stokes even at 30, 40, 45%, because he adds with in the field with the ball in hand, regardless of how many overs he can bowl, and with the bat in hand. And there's something about his persona, something about Ben Stokes, what he's done in the past. I don't think the Australians will ever forget what he did in Leeds, and it's those types of moments that he relishes, and especially in a series that the preparation has been average at best. Everyone comes into the series against their no favourites. Everyone comes in undercooked and a little behind where they would want to be. Is when you need characters to step up, and you're looking for a Ben Stokes catch at third slip, a breakthrough of a partnership, a battling 70 or 80 to give England a fighting chance. Those are the types of things that you want in the Ashes, and you need Ben Stokes there. He's your talisman. You need him. So even if you need to usher him through that first game to get him match ready and get the best out of him in the second test, has to play in the first test.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that even the fact that the preparation has been truncated, I think, is the ideal time to play him. I think if everyone else was up to speed and had been playing test matches and played all the warm-up games, and he was just trying to build up his workloads, but it is almost as though everyone in this situation is starting from zero, and even the guys who've been playing cricket in the World Cup have been sat in a hotel room for 2 weeks without any prolonged the preparation to be able to get ready. So,
what about his bowling though? Would you play him as one of four?
But then I mean, it's very difficult to say without knowing like the condition of the other bowlers.
Don't know.
Yeah.
No one knows.
I mean, if they're as underprepared as we say, the innings might only last 40 overs anyway.
That's true.
It'd be the shortest Test match in history.
10 straight balls.
But it's going to be it's just going to be so fascinating and interesting. But we also know about Ben Stokes. He can be a little bit blasé with what his body's feeling like. He's willing to push through barriers and put himself on the line, and this will be a situation where an Ashes Test match, he's so keen to come back and make a difference. He's been so positive with the way that he's been talking about the series and his chances of performing in it. That's the sort of thing that makes Ben Stokes go through walls. You don't want him to go through that wall too hard in the first Test match and not be available for the next four.
That's the thing.
I tell you what, Aggers is going to go and get the coffees in a moment. But before he does, I want you, Aggers, to say hello. I want you to say good day to a man who will be part of the TMS commentary team, and we're always thrilled to welcome him back. Glenn Mcgrath, how are you?
I'm fine, thanks, Sally. How are you guys?
Oh, the sledging can start, finally. Glenn Mcgrath, the most parochial New South Welshman of all time, has moved to Queensland. He's moved. What's happened to you? Why have you gone to Queensland? They're missing you down here, Glenn.
Yeah, it must be one of those things with COVID, but I've told all my Queensland mates that I'm a New South Welshman living in Queensland. I'm not a Queenslander, so let's just cover that off.
Jumping the shark, it really is. It really is. Glenn, it's lovely to talk to you. Looking forward to catching up when we see you.
Yeah, no, looking forward to it, Aggers. Should be good fun.
Good lad.
Yeah. Right, Aggers is off to get the coffee. But while Aggers disappears off, Glenn, I need to ask you the question as well. If Australia looked at that England team sheet on the first morning at the Gabba and Ben Stokes wasn't on it, what would they think?
To be honest, I think they'd be pretty happy. Ben Stokes, he's two players in one, and he has a certain aura about him, and certain players have an aura. And when the opposition team look at the team sheet and see these guys in the team, it has an impact straight away. But if they're not in the team, it actually has a positive impact as well. So I think Ben Stokes, the fact that he hasn't played for a long time, that's just the way it is. You just have to take that risk because of what he adds to the team and the impact he has, I guess, against an opposition team.
Let's talk about the Aussies then, shall we? Because, I mean, it's been, we've talked about some of the dramas around the England camp, but there has been plenty in Australia as well. Tim Payne resigning as captain in tears after a sexting scandal. He's now taking a break from cricket for the foreseeable future. Pat Cummins is the new captain with Steve Smith, his vice-captain. I mean, Glenn, how have you been looking at the build-up to this series from an Australian team point of view?
Well, it's an Ashes series, isn't it? So you've got to expect drama. I don't think anyone expected this, though. And, I do feel for Tim Payne. This was something that happened before he was captain. And I think as a captain, he's done a great job. Australia were in a pretty dire situation when he took over, and I think he's done a great job, and I think we should sort of focus more and hope people concentrate more on that. And then, he's finished up. Pat Cummins has come along, and it's the first time a fast bowler has been captain of an Australian cricket team or a test team in, 60 years since Ray Lindwall. So it's going to be a big ask, I think, for any fast bowler to be captain. It just brings different pressures and different things you have to focus on. If a batsman's captain, when he's batting, he can concentrate 100% on his batting. Whereas a bowler, especially a fast bowler, and number one in the world like Pat Cummins is, he has to concentrate 100% of his attention on his bowling when he's bowling. And then you think, okay, what's happening with where is the game going? He's got to think of who's bowling next. Okay, what changes, this and that. So there's just added pressures. That's not to say that a fast bowler can't be captain. Obviously, the boys in the studio there will agree that the fast bowlers are probably some of the most intelligent people on the field to start with, aren't they? So
absolutely.
But Pat Cummins himself, he's you wouldn't meet a nicer bloke. There, he's incredibly. He's very intelligent. He's an amazing athlete, and he's just a downright good bloke. You wouldn't meet a nicer bloke than Pat Cummins. So maybe that's what Australia needs at the moment to lead the way. I think he'll do a great job. He's got plenty of senior players there. Steve Smith is there alongside as vice-captain, plus plenty of other sort of senior players. So I think he won't be the captain alone. He'll stand at the top, but have senior players for support. So I think he'll do a great job.
So we've actually got pretty much a full house of fast bowlers or fast bowling all-rounders as well. I mean, Carlos, you've been captain. You've been captain, haven't you, as well at Birmingham Bears? So what did you think? I mean, will he be a good captain? Will it affect his bowling, the captaincy?
I think to have Steve Finn and Glenn Mcgrath call me a fast bowler, Ellie, does next to sacrilege. But being someone who runs up from a longer distance than a spinner, it is a challenge, and would have captained Steve at Manchester Originals as well, and I think that was probably even harder. And Finn, he leaned on him a lot. The 100 was very fast paced. I think in a test match, he'll get away with it, because I don't think you can bowl. Let me put it this way: in a shorter format, and I've done it already, you get into a situation where sometimes there's a over or a passage of play, a 2-over block, that something will happen, and you try to set up the back end in times and fill in overs in the middle. And if you are a bowler, you think, all right, cool, let me just get out the way. Probably didn't give enough notice, and you go bowl that over. In a test match, you can't come off a 8, 9, 10 over spell and then decide, oh crap, or I can just go again and again and again. So I think in the field, I think Steve Smith will take over, and when there's any little bit of tinkering that needs to be done, especially when Pat Cummins is bowling, I think he'll be the person to lead the charges and make those or on-field decisions. But when Pat Cummins is batting, or if he's not in the middle of a spell, I think he's a smart enough person and cricketer, thinks about the game deeply enough, that he'll have the way he wants to go about things. But it seems as though it is a relationship one between him and Steve Smith, where he'll be more than happy to relinquish a bit of control once he's in the middle of a spell. You can't bat and captain, you can't bowl and captain either, so he needs to concentrate on why he's number one bowler in the world and be as effective with the ball in hand, and I think that's why Steve Smith will play a big role.
Yeah, we'll get Finney's thoughts on the dynamic of this in a second, but let's hear from Steve Smith and Pat Cummins, who admits that there is a bit of uncertainty about having a bowler as a captain.
I think, there's a couple more unknowns about having a bowling captain, and that's why I think from the outset I was absolutely determined if I was captain to have someone like Steve as vice captain next to me. I feel like I've got quite a lot of experience to draw on that. I think a lot of the problems or potential issues around being a fast bowling captain, I'm sure we'll be able to work through. So feeling overall excitement. I'm naturally quite a calm person. I'm quite positive. I really love people. I'm a real people person. So I feel like I can bring a lot to that role.
I think there'll be some negativity from some people around it. I understand that and I get that. But I know that I've grown a great deal over the last 3 or 4 years. I'm a more rounded individual, and in turn, I think it's turned me into a better leader, and I'm excited to be in this position next to Patrick. I think he's done a terrific job over the last few years as vice captain and grown into a terrific leader, and I look forward to doing everything that I can in my power to help Patrick and help this team grow into a successful one, both on and off the field. So, we're both really excited and can't wait to get started in a couple of weeks' time in what's obviously an important Ashes series.
Steve Smith calling him Patrick. Simon Mann has already christened him Saint Patrick. I think Pat Cummins, because the expectations on him to be this kind of whiter than white personality as well. I mean, Steve, you must look at Pat Cummins and think, well, this guy's the full package, isn't he? Because he's got all the attributes that we've talked about. He's the number one fast bowler in the world, and he's now the Australian captain as well. But that puts a lot of pressure on him, doesn't it? It
does put pressure on him, but I think that's why it's a sensible decision to have someone with the experience of Steve Smith as your vice captain. I do think that in T20 cricket, I've only captained T20 and 50 over cricket for my county, Middlesex, my previous county, Middlesex, back in the UK. And the passages of play are really short and sharp, and you have to be on the ball to make quick decisions, and stuff can move really quickly and can get ahead of you if you're not in control, whereas the passages of play through test matches do tend to be longer, more drawn out, and easy to set a plan and bowl to it for half an hour, whereas in a T20 you might be 3 balls this plan, 3 balls another plan. So I think that the longer nature of test matches will suit Pat Cummins as a bowling captain, because he won't have to make those quick decisions. But I do also agree with what Carlos has said there, that whilst Pat Cummins is bowling, he is Pat Cummins the bowler. And that's when Steve Smith, and I think he said it in the press conference, that Steve Smith will be vociferous and moving fields and almost as if he is the captain whilst Pat Cummins is bowling, because it's important to relieve that pressure whilst the bowler's working through a spell.
And this is the thing as well, Glenn, isn't it, about a test match, because, you know, in the heat of Australia you're going to be spending time off the field as a fast bowler. He could even get injured. He'd get an injury in the nets in the warm-up to the Gabba, and Steve Smith is suddenly captain all over again. I mean, should Cricket Australia have just bitten the bullet and say, OK, Steve Smith is our captain?
I think that's the way they wanted to go, and to be honest, I think Pat Cummins probably deserves the opportunity. So the nature of the beast of being a fast bowler is there's more risk of injury. So I think they've gone the right way. I think Pat Cummins definitely deserved the captaincy. He's been vice-captain for quite a while now. And you've just got to take that risk. But you've got the senior players there to back up. And just listening to Steve and Carlos there, in respect to being a bowling captain, my biggest issue with Pat Cummins being a fast bowling captain in a test team is whether he'll bowl himself too much or not enough. So that's the balance that he needs to find, and I think the rest is you've got time. So but I think Steve Smith's there at the moment. Pat Cummins deserves the captaincy.
Is it still a difficult one? I mean, Carlos, for you, somebody as an independent observer, knowing everything that went into all the scandal, all the debate around the ball tampering scandal in Cape Town in 2018, what do you think, looking on from a distance? Is Steve Smith, you know, should he be in this leadership role again in 3 years?
I think people can change for the better. And I hate to see people being vilified for mistakes that they made many moons ago. Obviously, there's a lot more recent. I don't think he'll ever get past, or persons will ever get past Sandpaper Gate or whatever they called it. And it was a great shame to cricket. But at the end of the day, people make mistakes. You either forgive, if they have shown between the time of the offence and the time in question that they have grown. I'm not sure how much you could have gauged that growth. He wasn't in a leadership position, I don't think, in IPL since, or maybe for 1 year if I may be mistaken. But I mean, he's a leader. Having the captain's armband doesn't make you more of a leader. I think there are leaders in the dressing room, and there's only one captain. And I think regardless of if he's captain or not, he will be a leader. He is the talisman of the Australian team, and he's, from what I've seen, he's a good cricket captain. So he would have some sort of input into changes, whether it be bowling changes, fielding changes, plans. I just think the decision from the board would be more so what kind of message they want to send. Is it, if you shame the nation, you never ever being picked in a leadership role again? Or the message is, you've served your time, we've moved past it, we're giving you a second chance? And I think they've tried to do a bit of both, by saying, look, Steve, you're a vice captain. We know that Pat could fall ill, we know that he can bowl himself into injury, and then we're happy for you to take over. Is an easier sell that way. But yeah, I think it's just which way you want to go. I don't think that anything he's done between that time and now would have harmed his credibility to be able to lead or be in a leadership position again. So I'm happy to see that second chances are given.
Let's talk about the rest of the team lineups. I should say that last night we were watching absolutely a brilliant draw going on in Kanpur between India and New Zealand. New Zealand just surviving. The last wicket pair survived in, you know, light going and everything. But we were watching it together in the group in the pub. And as Andy Zaltzman said, you know, you're allowed to be, if you're watching it, with a beer in your hand, you're watching cricket, you're actually working. So we were working last night. And we've started to draw up our teams for this first test match. And Glenn, I'm interested to know who your wicketkeeper is, because obviously Australia have got to find a new wicketkeeper, and it's two men really going for the position, isn't it? So Alex Carey, we know a little bit about, played in the World Cup in England, and also Josh Inglis, which some of us will know something about because he's actually an Englishman.
I was wondering how long it would take you to bring that up, Ellie, but yeah, you're right. It is down to two people, isn't it? And Alex Carey, he's got the experience of playing at international level. So to be honest, I probably think they will go with someone like Carey. Josh Inglis is, I think he's up and coming. He's got some great raps about him. Ricky Ponting came out and gave him a massive rap the other day, saying that he expects Inglis to be the long-term prospect for an Australian keeper moving forward from here. So yeah, I tend to think they'll go with Carey. And he probably deserves it. He's for what he's done in the Australian short. I know it's a shorter version of the game, but he's done well there. And I think they'll probably give him the nod over Inglis.
He actually scored a century, didn't he, in the One Day Cup the other day, Alex Carey.
Yeah.
And Steve, do you think, in a way, ironically, Australia actually are stronger without Tim Payne in the side, that with the choice of Alex Carey and Josh Inglis, certainly it strengthens their batting lineup?
I think, yeah, you look at the numbers, and that would certainly suggest there's no guarantee that either of those guys obviously are going to come into Test match cricket and tear it up straight away. But I've seen Inglis play last year, and he was impressive, albeit in English conditions. The powerful counter-attacking batsman, the sort of person that is horrible to bowl to when a team's 5 down and they've got 300 on the board or something, and he comes in and takes it away again and puts it into another gear. But I've also played against Carey and the way that he sets up, and slightly more classical style of batting. They both have their positives, don't they? But yeah, certainly from a batting perspective, you would say that it strengthens Australia's middle lower order there. Yeah.
If you look at these two teams, Glenn, and the potential teams for the first test, how would you assess them? The strengths and the strengths and weaknesses in both the teams.
Yeah, I think the first test is, as it always is very important, and especially at the Gabba. The conditions probably it's going to be interesting because we've just had rain. It's just been non-stop rain up here, and hopefully it sort of starts clearing up a bit so they can prepare a decent wicket for the Gabba. But both teams are going in underdone. There's been no sort of pre-match sort of games that they've played to get themselves up for the conditions. And it's there's going to be a lot of great battles. Warner and Broad is going to be another one. I think that whoever wins that's going to have a big impact on the series. And then you look down both lists. I think the Australian team, in the past has relied heavily on Steve Smith and Marnus Labuschagne to a degree, whereas England has relied quite heavily on Joe Root. So they're the matchups that those guys are going to have to perform to give their teams the best opportunity. So yeah, it's I'm looking forward to that first test. There's a couple of spots still up for grabs in the Australian team, and then you look at the English team. It's probably the same. If Stokes comes in, who goes out, and are they going to take a spinner into the game? Up at the Gabba, you like to take a spinner, and then you've got Wokes, who I think is a quality player as well. I'm looking forward to seeing Robinson. I think he's comes with a lot of raps as well. I like the style of his bowling. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to this first test.
Carlos, you played 2 test matches against Australia, didn't you? You scored 50 in both of them. You dismissed David Warner, and so quite a lot of the current Australian squad you've played against, the English guys very well as well. Who would be in your starting lineups for the Gabba?
The names that Glenn mentioned there, Ollie Robinson and Chris Wokes. I think they're going to have a big part with the ball. Obviously, everyone talks about Anderson and Broad, but I'm not sure if both of them can play together. I just love that X factor of a Mark Wood, and it felt as though last time England went to Australia, that's what they were missing. Overton tried, and he provided that bit of stability. He got Steve Smith out once or a couple of times, but I think with Mark Wood's pace, if he can get the ball to do just a bit off the surface, it gives the bowling attack another dimension, and it brings Anderson and Broad back into the game. Joe Root has started to bowl some offies a bit more. Will he go into the test as the frontline spinner, which will allow you to strengthen or lengthen your batting a bit with Wokes and Robinson, along with Broad and Anderson? And then the other question is Ben Stokes, your fourth or your fifth bowler. I would personally have him as a batter and get some overs out of him if need be. But yeah, I think the biggest worry for me is the England batting lineup. Not many persons have put their hands up and cemented a play, and there were a few that would have had opportunities. And the Australia bowling lineup is pretty much set in stone. Probably Mitchell Stark is the only question mark, but you got Hazelwood, Cummins, Nathan Lyon, and they prove summer after summer how much of a potent attack they are, whether it's for New South Wales or for Australia. So to get past that bowling lineup, you need to have persons getting centuries. And so far, the English batting lineup hasn't proven, outside of Joe Root and Ben Stokes, that they can consistently produce individual centuries and team scores above 350 in Australian conditions.
Quick thought from you, Finney, as the leading wicket taker the last time England won the Ashes down under in 2010-11.
Well, I was leading wicket taker for 3 tests till I got dropped, and then Jimmy Anderson took me over. Understandably,
we'll take those 3
we'll
tests.
Take it. Yeah, why not?
Why not? Who's in your bowling lineup for England? As Carlos says, we pretty much know what the Australian bowling lineup will be, barring injuries. So Wokes, Wood, Broad, Robinson, Anderson, Leach. Who have I missed out?
Wood.
Would you pick
I
Wood?
think you need diversity of attack down here. I think where England went wrong the last time that we came down was everyone bowled a similar pace from right arm over the wicket, from a similar angle of the crease. You need some diversity in where the ball's delivered from and the pace that it comes down at. So whatever combination of those guys gives you that, then I would go with. But you'd say that the pace of Mark Wood is going to be pretty important, especially on a track like the Gabba.
Glenn Mcgrath, we can't let you go without asking you, because let me be the first person to ask you what your prediction is for the Ashes.
Well, do I predict with my head or my heart? That's a problem in the past, isn't it? And I sort of painted myself in a corner. If I said anything but 5-0, they go, "Oh, he's not confident anymore." But I think the first test is going to be very important. If Australia can get off to a good start, then fair enough, 5-0. But I think it's both teams have a few issues, and it's just going to see who's gets into form the quickest, who settles the quickest. I still obviously predicting an Australian win, but yeah, it's not going. I think it's not going to be 5-0, but we'll see after the first test. If Australia are dominating the first test, I might have to readjust my prediction.